The path of tears, the stations of the cross. Stations are stopping places, unless of course it's a through train. For the last 170 years, most English-speaking people have associated the word with railways. But before that, its most common use was religious. Stations were places where processions halted, where people stopped to pray, and the most popular of those stations were undoubtedly the stations of the cross. Almost every Roman Catholic church has its stations, and increasingly they are to be found in other churches too. 14 pictures, paintings very often, set on the wall of the church. They depict different moments on the Via Dolorosa, the sad path that Jesus followed on his way from the judgment hall to Golgotha, the place of the skull, Calvary in its Latin form. Many pilgrims to Jerusalem have followed that path, as thousands do every Good Friday and have experienced a little of what it meant in terms of suffering, exhaustion, pain, and abuse. As Jesus and the two being crucified with him made their way through the crowds towards the place of execution outside the city walls, they would have met a barrage of noises. There was ridicule from the crowds gathered for what St. Luke calls the spectacle. Others felt the horror of the sight, so that there were women among the spectators who were weeping and beating their breasts. Jesus spoke to them, telling them not to weep for him, but to weep for themselves and the children, as the appalling consequences of these events were fulfilled. The stations of the cross bring the images and experiences of the Via Dolorosa into the local church. They enable Christians on Good Friday, but also at other times, to share in some measure the lonely pilgrimage of the Savior on his way to the cross. The pictures or engravings capture the sense of rejection as well as the physical suffering of Jesus. They remind us of the humiliation of the scourging and of the purple robe and crown of thorns with which the soldiers set out to ridicule the one they had heard described as the King of the Jews. Some have felt that the stations of the cross concentrate unhelpfully on the physical suffering of Jesus. But in fact, they follow, for the most part, the biblical narrative, which is restrained in its reportage of what was, by any standards, a gruesome and vicious spectacle. It took the film, The Passion of the Christ, to turn the words of the gospel into vivid cinematic images, with the result that many people found the experience deeply shocking. Well, it was shocking, though the Gospels make no attempt to emphasize, much less exaggerate, the physical element of the suffering of the Christ. That is left to our imaginations, filtered through our knowledge now of the whole story: rejection, suffering, passion, death, and then resurrection. It is the story of our redemption, and at some point we have to accept it, that it cost Jesus, the Son of God, a hideously painful death, a real death for our real sins. The various stations mark details of that long walk to destiny. Jesus takes up his cross, echoing his earlier call to his disciples to take up the cross daily. To carry the cross was part of the punishment for the criminal. To stagger to the place of execution under the weight of the cross beam. In fact, Jesus, already weakened by the flogging he had been given, fell under its weight, and the soldiers dragged someone from the crowd to carry it. That man was Simon of Cyrene, the quintessential bystander who finds himself very much part of the action. We know little beyond his name, and a fascinating detail which Mark adds, that he was the father of Alexander and Rufus. The fact that Mark, a member of the first Christian community in Jerusalem, knew this detail suggests that Simon and his family became Christians, in which case the apparently random recruitment of a man from the crowd turned out to be much more than that. There are various incidents added to the stations for which there is no direct biblical authority. Veronica, who was said to have wiped the brow of Jesus, and various other occasions when Jesus stumbled or fell. Yet, none goes beyond reasonable supposition, and altogether add to a mental picture of that long and sad pilgrimage to Golgotha. This is reinforced by readings and prayers at each station, and sometimes a hymn or a song. The stations of the cross go beyond being mere visual aids, like pictures in stained glass. Their very name, stations, tells us that they are to be observed rather than simply looked at. Each station invites us to stop, to reflect, to remind ourselves of the cost of our redemption and the suffering of Jesus. In a genuine sense, by walking the stations of the cross, we can begin to share his pilgrimage of pain. Isaac Watts' famous hymn invites us not just to survey the wondrous cross, but also to allow its image to change our whole lives. That is precisely what the stations are meant to do as well. Thank you.